sophism. Whatever a man hears or reads constantly without contradiction, he is apt to believe. John Barnard Byles. In his book, Sophisms of Free Trade, John Barnard Byles explained some fallacies about free trade that were common in the early 19th century. These deceptions are still in vogue today. Listen to Sophisms number 7 through 14 and decide for yourself. Sophism number 7. Protected manufacturers are sickly. Byles explained that only a slight review of any manufacturer would disprove this sophism. Byles pointed out that British manufacturing was assisted by protective duties, and that stringent protectionism has not only created manufacturers, but created them where they would not naturally have existed, in spite of great natural disadvantages. Great Britain was an example, since her natural disadvantage was that she didn't possess raw material. Byles also pointed out that the French professed protectionism, and that in Germany protection had produced manufacturing prosperity. Byles noted that at that time, the more protected are beginning to beat the less protected manufacturers on their own ground. Even developing Russian industry provided an example of the benefits of protectionism. Russia had tried the free trade system, and it had failed miserably until it was abandoned, and Russia started protecting her manufacturers and found the sure road to prosperity and power. Even tiny Belgium had proved the benefits of protectionism. Byles also pointed out that America had flourished with the protectionist system, even in the face of the claims of disaster by the British economists. In every case noted by Byles, protectionism had triumphed over free trade. In fact, the sickly industries were the ones that were not protected, which proved that the sophism of protected manufacturers being sickly was an inversion of reality. Sophism number 8. Don't overgovern. According to this sophism, the natural course of events were necessarily beneficial and were to govern, relieving rulers from the responsibility of action. Economic theorists pointed to past mistakes of governments in order to denigrate government's positive role in an economy. This sophism asserted that the interest of individuals and the interest of the public, which is but an aggregation of individuals, necessarily and universally coincided. Far from being true, this sophism left shady and obnoxious people free from government and regulations. But Byles insisted that there resides in every enlightened and wise government powers of active interference for good, unknown and unsuspected. In fact, Byles explained that government was indispensable for the very existence of civilization. The question for government was, what was the appropriate amount of interference on the behalf of the community? According to Byles, the duty of government was simply the concentrated action of the wisdom and power of the whole society on a given point, a mutual agreement by all that certain things shall be done or not done for the general benefit, and an enforcement of that agreement. Government was to provide for the will of the people and the benefit of the community, to prevent abuse by individuals. Byles remarked, "Let any individual abandon himself to the natural course of events, and we know what will soon become of him. Let a number of individuals, a community, do the same, and their fate will be the same." Sophism number 9. What is the good of colony? Free traders maintained that the colonial system was good for Britain, but Byles claimed that free trade disadvantaged English colonies and allowed them no protection against those foreigners who enjoy overwhelming advantages. Byles said that this caused discord in the colonies that would have been prevented had Britain treated the colonies as if they were part of Britain. Byles suggested that such a policy would have meant much greater trade with a solid foundation. According to Byles, because of the expense of maintaining colonies, Britain should make them an integral part of the mother country. Byles maintained that in order for the Britain to compete with Russia and the United States, that the colonies should be a part of Britain, and should have representation in the British legislature. Sophism number 10. Protection would destroy external trade. According to Byles, Britain disproved this sophism because in fact no nation used protectionism more than Britain, and no nation had such an extensive and lucrative foreign trade as Britain. Byles pointed out that the strictest protection in the world has coincided with the greatest foreign trade in the world. Byles said that protectionism has been used for centuries in Britain to steadily increase in trade, and that it was the surest way to foster and protect permanent and extensive mutual foreign trade. Britain was proof that protectionism would increase trade instead of diminishing it. Sophism number 11. The distress to the country is owing to taxes and the expenditures of government. Byles proffers that European history and the existing conditions of Britain had proved that the prosperity of the nation at large was not affected by taxes. According to Byles, taxes are only a problem if they are paid to another country as a tribute for debt. Taxes that circulate within a country were not lost to the country and cause no problems. Sophism number 12. Increase of exports and imports is the index of national prosperity. Byles had already shown in Sophism 4 and 5 how much more important home production is than foreign production. Byles explained that imports decrease the income of domestic producers and labor, which were a detriment to national prosperity. If an article is produced within a country, it would necessarily decrease exports and imports, but increase the national prosperity. Thus, an increase in exports and imports would indicate a decay of domestic production. Byles said it cannot be repeated too often that a nation, whether she buy from abroad or produce at home, can have no more than she produces. The development of her domestic producing forces is therefore the true and only sound test for prosperity. Again, the reality is the opposite of the sophism. Sophism number 13. All commodities should be rendered as cheap as possible. Byles covered the different ways that an article could be considered cheap, but explained that for the benefit of the masses, the price of an article was not the primary concern. Regardless of its price, an article had to be accessible or attainable for the multitude, which meant that the people had to have the means to purchase an article for there to be plenty of it, and that required adequate wages for a fully employed labor force. Byles explained that the aim of all good legislation should be to unite the two blessings, cheapness and plenty. That was not possible if there was no means for customers to purchase goods. Since cheapness benefited the few and plenty benefited the many, it was clear that legislation should favor the masses and be in favor of good jobs. Byles said that government should legislate for full and various productive employment of the people. If cheapness destroyed the means of purchase, it only created want. Sophism number 14. Free importation is the source of plenty, protection of scarcity. Byles explained that the word plenty had to be defined. Byles said that there are two sorts of plenty. One sort is a mere relative plenty, where there is more than individual consumers can buy and pay for, and that another and a much better sort of plenty is an abundance at once absolute and accessible, where there is as much as the masses want, combined with accessibility. Byles explained that government should aim to provide for the means of purchase by the multitude, which meant their full and various productive employment, since that was the means by which the masses profited. That meant protecting the home market and the labor that it employed, which was the opposite of what the sophism implied. In this section, Byles explained that it was not the protected manufacturers that were sickly, but the manufacturers that operated under free trade. Byles had to look no further than Great Britain to prove that, because the British manufacturers were the most protected in the world, and some of the healthiest. In fact, Byles said that the road to prosperity for a country and its manufacturers was the protectionist system. Byles also pointed out that a country shouldn't be governed for the interest of just a few individuals, but for the masses. Byles said that the interest of the individual cannot be allowed to circumvent the interest of society. The purpose of government was to wisely regulate and control the economy for the benefit of all of its citizens. The fact that Britain used protectionism more than any other nation, and yet had more external trade than any other nation, was proof that protectionism didn't destroy external trade. Byles also said that Britain was proof that taxes within a country didn't hurt the country, but that taxes that went outside of the country in order to pay for the tribute of debt because of free trade was detrimental to a country. Also, Byles explained that imports decreased the wages of domestic producers and labor and was a detriment to a nation's proprietors. An increase in imports indicated a decay of domestic production. Byles pointed out that a nation can have no more than it produces. He also explained that for an article to be cheap required more than availability. People had to be able to buy the article, and that required adequate wages to a fully employed workforce so that the people would have the means to purchase the item. All legislation should be in favor of providing full and ample employment for the masses. When plenty meant an excess of goods which people couldn't afford, then the word plenty was meaningless. This section covered Sophisms 7 through 14. But how does protectionism affect the capital of a country? And how had free trade affected Ireland, which had been under the free trade system for years? Also, how does free trade affect the population growth of a country? That will be covered in the next section.